Let me move on to invite our last panel. We have Rabbi Leonard Gordon. He's a chair of the National Council of Synagogues in the USA, and Professor Leonie Lefkovitz, professor of English, I'm really happy to see, from Northeastern University.
Good morning, everyone, friends old and new. It was my privilege to participate last year in an interfaith journey to Spain, co-sponsored by the American National Council of Synagogues, Hizmet, and the ARCO Forum, in which Jews, Muslims, and Christian participants visited Cordoba, Granada, and other cities in Spain that brought to life the period of history that we chose to learn about together, La Convivencia in Al-Andalus. The period is generally dated from about 700 until the Christian Reconquista and the expulsions of 1492 that ended what has been characterized, some argue, in an over-romanticization as a golden age, in which these three religious communities lived in relative, if sometimes fraught, coexistence. A time under Islamic rule when there was remarkable mutual influence in such fields as philosophy, theology, mysticism, and notably literature. Hebrew poetry was unarguably transformed by the encounter with Arabic poetic forms and the works of such poets as Shmuel HaNagid and Yehuda HaLevi are considered to have inaugurated the golden age of Hebrew poetry, still very much on the lips of contemporary Jews who find the texts of these poems peppering our liturgy and sung routinely as beloved prayers. Another privilege that I enjoyed on this richly satisfying adventure in Spain, during which I deepened my friendship with numbers of people at this conference, was the opportunity to share some of these Hebrew poems in English translation beside the work of Muslim contemporaries, and offer interpretations to my colleagues, each of whom was charged to contribute with their own teachings to our shared learning. In organizing this interfaith trip, we began with the premise that travel and learning are productive strategies for relationship building, establishing a foundation of trust and understanding for ongoing collaboration and allyship. Leaving home, supporting one another in the inevitable challenges of a journey, navigating unfamiliar landscapes together, and more deeply cooperating in the creation of a collage of a shared moment in history in the leisure of our prescribed days together, is a technology for advancing our shared goals. Each of us served formally and informally in the roles of both teachers and learners. In the Jewish historical experience, the Beit Midrash, the house of study, our madrasa, is a site of holiness, on par with the house of prayer and the family home. In principle, such learning is for the sake of heaven, working in partnerships to better comprehend the meaning of holy books. Scholars have also recognized that perhaps equally powerful is the love that grows not only for God and holy books, but the love that one develops, perhaps as a function of transference, for that aspect of divinity that is in one's fellow learners. Professor Vanessa Oakes writes movingly in her book, Words on Fire, about the relationship between chevrutot, study partners. She puts it this way: studying together, you develop a profound personal intimacy. You open up spiritually to each other. If you are learning Torah seriously, you bring your whole self into it, sharing your deepest inner experiences. Partly thanks to my half-century-long marriage to a student of literature, Lori Lefkovitz, my co-presenter this morning, my sharing on our trip was poetry. As part of her work at Northeastern, Lori leads 5-week summer courses in different parts of the world. For the past 2 summers, she took diverse student groups to Morocco and Spain, where she taught folk tales and poetry, also with a focus on La Convivencia. So in advance of my trip with Hizmet, I was homeschooled by Lori as we studied a selection of poems, a small sample of which we will briefly explore with you in the time we have remaining, making a limited case for the value of learning poetry together in interfaith contexts. Poetry distinctively captures paradox, that condition of life in which we are aware that two truths may contradict one another and nonetheless both prevail. Holding, balancing the complexity of competing truths lies somewhere near the heart of interfaith work. Struggling over the meanings of well-crafted texts, learners can find an opening of heart and mind, and that closeness comes from shared intellectual engagement. I pass the baton to Lori.
Thank you, Lenny, and my gratitude also to our hosts for this extraordinary opportunity to be among you here in India. On both of our travels in Spain, we appreciated that we were recreating Al-Andalus from our own moment in time. To underscore that our own experience is the filter through which we apprehend the past, Lenny began his teaching in Spain, and I begin my university travel course in Al-Andalus, not with a work of medieval literature, but rather with the Palestinian national poet Mahmoud Darwish and his magnificent 1992 11-part ode, or Qasida, with the translated title 11 Stars over Andalusia. The opening stanza concludes with this lament: "Soon we will search in the margins of your history, in distant countries, for what was once our history. And in the end, we will ask ourselves, was Andalusia here or there, on the land or in the poem?" Unquote. Layering one displacement over another, the poet invites us into the experience of diaspora, the longings and confusions that rise up from our efforts to retrieve one's own history in the marginalia of conquerors' revisions. Asking, was Andalus here or there, on the land or in the poem, Darwish empowers the text to embody and extend the legacies of ancestral homelands. Darwish wrote these poignant verses, originally published in Arabic in London and Al-Quds, in commemoration of the 500th anniversary of the fall of Granada to the Christian conquerors in 1492, a year resonant for two peoples, Jews and Muslims. In Darwish's words, Andalus might be here or there or anywhere, a meeting place of strangers in the project of building human culture. It is not only that there was a Jewish-Muslim coexistence, but the fates of the people were, no matter, it's okay. But the fates of the people were similar. That was his quote. But more important, according to Edward Said, Darwish, who had recently made his own first visit to Spain, also wrote this poem as an eloquent, if indirect, response to the Madrid Peace Conference in 1991, the outcome of which he found profoundly disillusioning. In the first stanza, "On our last evening in the land," Darwish captures a moment of transition, and he writes, "On our last evening on this land, we chop our days from our young trees." There's a tree reference for you. "We chop our days from our young trees, count the ribs we'll take with us, and the ribs we'll leave behind." Unquote. Always as refugees, we leave parts of ourselves behind, not least of which the bones of our dead. A few lines later, he writes, "Here on our last evening, we look closely at the mountains besieging the clouds, a conquest and a counter-conquest, and an old time handing the new time the keys to our doors. So enter our houses, conquerors, and drink the wine of our mellifluous muwasha." The reader understands that Darwish, who was born in 1942 in Birwe, a village that would be destroyed in his own childhood, has folded Granada into Palestine, and everything, including the relationship between the clouds and the mountains, becomes an imaginative projection of these layered conquests and reconquests. The keys of abandoned homes evoke Palestinian losses, even as the poet suggests that the old time, 1492, gives over the keys to the new time, nearly 500 years later, when new conquerors displace the old. The poet-speaker offers up hot tea and pistachios left on the tables and imagines the conquerors drinking the wine of classical Arabic poetry, the muwasha, which had long since, ironically, become a beloved form of Hebrew poetry. The poem insists that Al-Andalus is not one place and not one time, that people carry their pasts into the imaginative realm of our present, and while we are here on earth, our long ancestral timelines briefly cross one another. By beginning my course here, I hope to signal to my diverse students that our conversations will not evade unsettling issues about which we may be sad, confused, and divided. At our best, we are not only building consensus, but also finding ways to respectfully process difference. Pursuing the theme of separation, I introduced the Hebrew poets with Dunash ibn Labrat, a 10th century Hebrew poet born in Fez who settled in Cordoba and is credited with introducing, controversially in his own time, Arabic metrical patterns into Hebrew poetry. In a surviving poetic fragment, Dunash defended his choice. He wrote, "Let scripture be your Eden and the Arabs' books your paradise grove." While the details of his life are vague, we gather that Dunash was exiled from Cordoba in the political turmoil of 960 following the death of his patron. Our evidence for this exile comes in part from the only surviving Hebrew poem from this period known to have been composed by a woman, a poem discovered in the Cairo Geniza, a rich repository for medieval Hebrew literature. The poem was written by Dona Dunash Labrat, his wife, and it reads, it's short, quote, "Will her love remember his graceful doe, her only son on her arms as he parted? On her left hand he placed a ring from his right, on his wrist she placed her bracelet. As a keepsake she took his mantle from him, and he in turn took hers from her. Would he settle now in the land of Spain if his prince gave him half the kingdom?" Unquote. Like 11 Stars, this Hebrew love poem locates us in a moment of departure and separation, a mother with an infant on her hip, exchanging a series of intimate, specific keepsakes with the fleeing poet, as she asks if he will stay faithful, wondering aloud if he will return to her. Refugees and family separations, the figure of the young child traumatically detached from his parent, is sadly resonant in our own moment. My mind goes unbidden to images close to home of immigrant families in the United States. This poem displays love and loss and the paradox that the promise of eternal faithfulness that is marriage is a trust ever threatened by exigencies of life lived in history. We know that Labrat penned a poetic response insisting that he could not betray the bride of his youth given by God. But what we do not know, because history has not yielded this secret, is whether or not Labrat ever did return to his wife and son. I'm going to skip a little bit here. Viewed nostalgically, Al-Andalus is sepia-tinted, the cusp of ending, saturated with memory. Here we all were, remembering the retrospectively designated convivencia, but actually, in 21st century Spain, participating in the centuries-long process of myth-making. Al-Zahra, which I deleted this part, but Al-Zahra, which is a shared memory of Jews and Muslims who grieve this loss in Granada, symbolizes loss and former grandeur, an enduring symbol of the fragility of power and an always fragile coexistence. The past cannot be retrieved, but memory crystallizes into stories from which we create a collective memory. Theorists distinguish between collective memory and a changing cultural memory, the shared knowledge, beliefs, values, and practices that a group of people transmit across generations. Cultural memory emerges from collaboration. Today, Lenny and I hope to have advocated for the value of mediated conversations in which reading literature together, grappling with complexity, celebrating beauty, and coming in this way to respectfully acquire the cultural products of others contributes to building bonds of friendship and love. At this conference, we honor Hizmet's commitment to those values. Thank you.